Hello everyone and welcome back to the Ember BTC channel. Today's video is going to be a top-down analysis of the BTC chart. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Starting off on the weekly time frame, you can see we have the yearly open mapped out already. What we're going to do is, given over the last few weeks we've been just working with charts on a week by week basis, we're going to start from the higher time frame again, just to align some of our clear levels. So as of the moment, we are in this key SNR zone, which you could probably extend down to about 87 or 88 to be really specific, just given we had this range low of this consolidation. We dropped down, we got this short-lived underside retest after we took out this low. So just in and around this region, there's a lot of historical price action. There's also the yearly open in and around it as a confidence level, but I guess we'll come back to that when we drop down to the daily time frame. We can also look at this as a range. So this being our range low from this high to this low. Of course, we had this SFP up here that you could extend the courtesy of the range high over to. And then on this range high, you can see we have the SFP initially, where we found resistance, came back down. There's a consolidation at the time, and then we've covered all this price action multiple occasions. But of course, we had some sort of flipping of this level, and price was trying to find some support here, but that was short-lived. Also, another concept which we referred to, I believe, probably months ago at this stage, was deviation. The deviation on this higher time frame range, we had this deviation outside above the range highs, which of course now in hindsight was a distribution range above, where of course some profit taking most likely occurred from larger players. And potentially now we are moving down towards this deviation of this range low. So I've changed the yearly open just to a purple color, just so that we can visibly differentiate it. And what we'll do is quickly we'll break down this price action here, because this is what has occurred since our previous markup day video, which I believe was actually maybe this retracement after we got this bounce up. I believe we were in and around this region, and of course, as I guess always is in markets, there was one of two scenarios at the time where we would have came up and potentially came back down, got a flipping of this area here after an SFP of this low, and then potentially continue up back inside and above, say, just this range high for the time being. Of course, there was a range in itself here, but we'll ignore that just for the time being. Or scenario two, which is what did play out, was we would put in that lower high again. So we found resistance in this previous support area on the lower time frame or even on the daily time frame, which then of course led to this really sharp move down to the downside, which again is another scenario I thought was on the cards after we got this bearish underside retest of the range high, which has been such a crucial level across this entire year essentially. That being said, given the momentum has been so significant to the downside, we are really looking for key pivotal levels, and this key SNR zone that we mapped out on the weekly remains very much valid on the daily, and you would probably be able to map out on the daily if you were on that time frame anyway. It's an extremely key level for price to hold. Even from potentially a short-term perspective, if we were to get some sort of bullish reaction here, which I think we potentially will put in some sort of local bottom in this area, that's not to say that we won't come back up and get again a bearish retest for the next leg down. But I do think we will get some sort of bullish reaction here, fingers crossed, which would then be a long trigger back towards that 100k level, where again we'll look at the level now more specifically, but I think that becomes another massive challenge and potentially the next lower high that we put in on this current downtrend. So before we move on from the current region that we're in, there's a couple of things worth noting. So we have our fib tool, which we can take out and bring from the low to the high. And let's just say we look for our 618 level. So we do have that 6-1 golden pocket in and around this level, which essentially is just a really good way to identify the value bet or discount in price between its low and its high to determine its discounted price. But also we have the stacked lows that were left behind in this consolidation, or I guess level. If you look at it from auction market theory, just a range where price was kind of slowly grinding up before we expanded up and got to the next consolidation and then the next consolidation. But in these areas, there tends to be some high volume nodes if we were to look at the volume profile. So there's a lot of stacked liquidity below here, which I do think dropping down into this key SNR zone. And I guess you could also look at this whole area maybe to about this region as a potential supply zone, or sorry, demand zone, especially after the sweep of this low, which then led to the move up, your change in market structure here, and then the push up into this consolidation, of course, distribution range. And now we've returned back into it. So I do think this is a really good area for price to bounce after such a significant leg to the downside. I do think, as if you look at it from the flip side, is that these sort of legs do get to a certain level of exhaustion where they do have to retrace for fair value in the market before a continuation can occur. And I think this bounce would be really nice from a trade perspective. And of course, I've mapped out this key SNR zone where, of course, we had it from a previous market update video where you have these lows where there was numerous supports found. And then, of course, we had the Trump news where even in that instance, there was, of course, probably some resting limit orders in this region, which then helped price find that bid where it came back up on that dead cat bounce, basically. And then even on this retracement, we took the low. This was a confluence level at a time. And then this just kind of highlights how you can actually still profit on longs as long as you don't have unrealistic targets or you know where your trouble zones are. So if you were to say, look to long this SFP of this low in conjunction with the key SNR level, you could have targeted a long up with your first take profit at 105k, which we did. If you go back and look through the videos and my tweets at the time, I said I was buying here. But of course, you can't then have the expectation that because you've bought the bottom, that you're going to sell the top and you're going to wait until price gets up here. You have to be realistic. Where are the trouble zones? So we sold in and around this region, captured nice profit in there. And there's a similar scenario occurring here where I'll probably be happily buying spot down to about 85. Of course, not huge amounts, but I do think it's a nice value play given that we are at about 30% or 33% discount from all-time highs. And just for the short-term perspective, our naked points of control, if we look at what's in the immediate, we have this naked point of control down here again, which is in confluence with our key SNR level. And then also this high here, which we said could be determined as a demand zone. This plot of price action on the higher time frame. And then of course there is a few naked points of control down in this region, which may have an effect on price if you're maybe looking for scalps, but I don't think they're going to be too pivotable, just given that they're quite old. We do have two immediate overhead, which could potentially be areas where we front run maybe a retracement back to 100k. So it's an area worth looking at if we do bounce. But I do think there'll be more of just draws on liquidity, and we will still push on beyond them. And maybe from a short, on a lower time frame market structure, we might get a short-term retracement on the lower time frame and kind of get some sort of movement like this if we do get to them. So maybe a rejection from them might be short-lived. I can't imagine that they'll be extremely pivotable levels, but it is something worth noting. And then finally, I'll just drop down to the 4 hour to finish off the current analysis. So you can see, of course, we have the higher time frames, which are still visible on the 4 hour, our key levels. You can see here that there was probably a nice scalp short on that underside bearish retest of the yearly open, acting as support initially, which gave a little bounce, came back up, rejected away from it, and then of course in confluence with this supply zone, so these green candles on the way up before we drop down through it, so we return to them levels. Previous buyers in this zone will mitigate positions, which of course creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of essentially selling occurring, and people use that as a reference and blah blah blah. So as of the moment, we are in this key SNR zone on the higher time frame, which we're anticipating will put in a local bottom. And of course, that just essentially looks something like this, where you have a low put in, and then you get kind of a short-term uptrend on the lower time frames, which of course, if you're looking at it from a 4 hour perspective or 1 hour perspective, could be multiple days. But over the longer time horizon, maybe over the week or over the month, the trend is overall down, as we can see is the case. But we could potentially see something along the lines of price pushes up here, then maybe we get a trigger long if we get back above this high here. And you can see we've put in a lower low, and then a higher low, and then a higher high on the 4 hour time frame, which maybe triggers that we're going to get some sort of move like this. And then of course, as I said, this region here is probably going to be a major resistance level for the next next lower high to continue this current downtrend, just because I don't see any current catalysts which would cause BTC to continue pushing up. And when you have selling occurring so linearly like this, it tends to continue happening until we reach a significant liquidity pool and some sort of potentially catalyst for a local bottom, which may be this liquidity over here, and then spending some time below it to accumulate. So again, just to have some final thoughts and recap on today's BTC market update video, I'm extremely proud of how we've called this market since we started the channels. I hope it's been really insightful. I had a couple of comments on a video I did, I think last week, where some people were saying that, oh, I was too bearish and that I got it wrong a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm overly bearish. And of course, that was foolish thinking. I've lost thousands of trades potentially. That would never affect my decision making. all we can do is look at the levels and look at the fractal patterns and look at liquidity and what we know about the markets and how they operate and how they work, and use that to make best educational guesses, which is all ever this is. They're all percentage guesses because no one can say for certain, right? So I do think potential local bottom is around this region, might extend down to about that 86k level. But I do think we get some sort of bounce, and then of course this region here becomes really the next major resistance level if we do get up into it. But I do think if we look at it from the higher time frame perspective, we are looking for a bottom in around this 75k, and you really could extend it all the way down to 58k. And I think any sort of accumulation between these two price points long term, given I do think BTC long term will continue to go up, of course, hopefully reaching that $1 million mark one day. Maybe it's 30 years time, maybe it's 3 years time, you never know. But I do think accumulation in this range long term is probably a really nice level. And of course, anything below this range low, if we do get a kind of range like this, I will probably be looking to accumulate as much as possible, given that there's no, I guess, FTX level crash where BTC ends up going down to 30k. Of course, you just never know when that next event might occur. But from a price action perspective, this is what I'm looking at from the higher time frames. And then on the current leg, potential local bottom in around this confluence zone, whereas the yearly open, the 618, the key SNR zone, a couple of naked point of controls, one in this region that we could potentially get down into, and then look for some sort of shorts in this region. So that's all for today's BTC top-down analysis. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on the current markets and what you think might happen next. And I'll see you guys in the next one.